Okay, part two. Okay, we got to go back in time now.
Okay.
I would like for you to tell me about where you grew up, your mother and father, and other influential people in your life as a child.
As a child, well, I grew up on a farm in Indiana, and I was surrounded by relatives. My mother and father had met at a Quaker boarding school, and actually that's the same Quaker boarding school where I met my husband. And I began to call it the Quaker Matrimonial Bureau. But at any rate, they were both raised in Quaker families, and the families were all part of the exodus, the immigration from England and Ireland, when King George was persecuting various religions who didn't want to worship his way. And so that's how William Penn got Pennsylvania, because William Penn's father was a courtier at the king's court, and William Penn refused to take off his hat to the king. So the king said something like, "Get that boy out of here, give him some land over in the New World." And that's how William Penn got Pennsylvania, and did very well with it. But that didn't answer your question about my family. And we would go to events, weddings and funerals and Quaker meetings, which started with, I don't know how much people know about Quaker meetings, but they started in silence, and came from the vision that was had when a man sat down under a tree and had a vision, and he reported that there is a sea of light and a sea of dark. Search ye the light. So Quakers developed the practice of sitting in silence, no pastors, no music, and meditating. And then when they felt that they had found something worthy of the light, something good, they could share it with other people. And so that was the culture that my whole family, all my relatives on both sides were part of. And but when I was about 8 or 9 years old, we came home from a funeral perhaps, and my mother was busy in the kitchen or setting the table, and I said to her, "Mother, am I a Quaker?" And she didn't even pause. She just said, "Yes, thee is a birthright." They use plain language. "Thee is a birthright Quaker." And I rolled that over in my little mind, and I said, "How did you all know what I was going to believe?" And so I began at that time to be watchful and decide whether I thought that Quakers were really living up to what they professed. And for instance, our grandparents wore what was called plain clothing, something like the Mennonites, who's also a peace church. No, they didn't want to use anything extra, the simplicity of their lives. And so the men's collars, there wouldn't be a collar, it'd just be nothing extra fabric used. Simplicity. And I guess that's somewhere along in there is where I learned the use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. And so farmers were, Quakers were mostly farmers and teachers. My grandfather was a teacher. And influences, it wasn't until I got to Quaker boarding school in Barnesville, Ohio, that I began to study Quaker history. And it was very important to me to realize what a role that Quakers and others had played in this country when they got here. They were they considered all mankind equal. That included women, and many of the churches, did not. So that when they wrote the Constitution for our country, Abigail Adams communicated with her husband, Sam Adams, and said, "Don't forget the ladies." But of course, the men did forget the ladies, and we were not allowed to vote for many, many years until the suffrage movement. And Quakers were involved in the suffrage movement very much. They also were involved in education for Native Americans, and
They played a very important role too in the Underground Railroad, didn't they?
Yes, they did. In fact, I found the little town where we grew up and went to school in Indiana had an Underground Railroad station that was one of our relatives ran on his farm, but we did not know it until it came out in some research recently. And so it went to a lot of places, and Underground Railroad. And but the history gets so lost, and sometimes one of the things that I've found interesting here in St. Petersburg, I ask particularly younger people if they know about Sojourner Truth, since we chose her name for our center to honor her. And so many times people would reply to me, "Oh, the Underground Railroad," and I'd say, "Oh no, that was not Sojourner Truth. That was how you say it? Again, brain bubble." At any rate, that bothers me when I can't pull those names up fast enough.
That's okay.
So,
well, when you remember, just shout it out.
well, okay.
But in terms of yourself, what was that spark that ignited you to become interested in the civil rights and for African Americans and also the Vietnam War? Those were two things that were really coming to a head in the late 60s and 70s.
Right, and actually it started at Wicker Boarding School because a gentleman named Bayard Rustin came to speak to the students, and he so impressed me. He was speaking at that time for Fellowship of Reconciliation, which was addressing racism. And I thought, I could do that. That's right. That's the right thing to do. And so later on, I learned that Bayard Rustin became a close associate with Martin Luther King Jr., and in fact was one of the main organizers for the Poor People's March on Washington. But I always remember, I can see him now standing in front of us speaking about the importance of activism and challenging racism.
Did you take part in any of those marches or any of those types of events here or outside of the South?
Yes, we did. When we were in Rhode Island, I was my husband place, and so we lived there for a number of years, and our children were born there. And so I was active against the Vietnam War and also in civil rights things there. And at that point, I had joined the Unitarian Universalist Church in Providence, Rhode Island. And so when our congressman from that area died, I forget the circumstances, but he passed away while he was in office, and so we had a special election, and we ran our pastor of the church, a very ardent anti-racist and progressive person, for that congressional seat. And we lost, but it was a great experience, and it was one of my first experiences of working in a political campaign. And
What was the temperament of Providence at that time? Were they pro or
Well,
con?
it was very mixed. Rhode Island, was founded by Roger Williams and was a progressive state. And it's different because it had all the waves of immigration that were from the beginning of this country. There were little pockets and villages that were French or English or Portuguese. So it has a fascinating history. And that was the first time I ever lived in a city, was after we were married and living in Providence. And
how long did you live there?
well, that we were married in, let's see, after 63, 64 years of marriage. I should know when it was. But at any rate, we came here. Al was offered a job here. He had a degree in English literature from Brown University, but he worked in manufacturing through all of his working life. And so he was brought here to be the manager of a watch band manufacturing plant. And I cried, and I said, I don't want to go to Florida. I know it's going to be very racist, and sure enough, I found it was.
Tell me about that when you first got here, those first couple of years, or even just your first year.
Well, right away, I connected with the Quaker meeting people and the Unitarians, and organized a group of people from the Unitarian Church called People for Peace. And we did a new flyer about war and racism every week, and we're out on handing out